Great. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a nice break or got to enjoy Connie's Sumerian herbs. Tonight, we have Ed Vanderjagt, who is a second-generation Sumerian reconstructionist and father of a third. That's cool. He's author of the Annotated Illustrated Descent of Inanna and the creator of the Sumerian Oracle deck, which he'll be presenting to us tonight. He is perhaps best known as the founder of Temple of Sumer, one of the oldest and longest running Mesopotamian pagan organizations, acting as a hub for many members of the Mesopotamian temples and the traditions. So tonight he's presenting us with his Sumerian Oracle deck. One more person. Ahead, take it away.
Alrighty. So I'm guessing that about half of you know what the Sumerian Oracle deck is. And the other half probably have absolutely no clue. So the Sumerian Oracle deck is similar in many ways to a tarot deck, but where tarot has a lot of European symbolism built in, I built this around Mesopotamian symbolism, Mesopotamian numerology, and the images are all based on cylinder seal images, temple art, art found on vases, descriptions found in texts. And so the whole system is a little bit different from what you might be used to in tarot. So there will be enough that you're familiar with that it'd be easy to pick up on, but there's enough that it's different that I couldn't just make a Sumerian tarot. And actually, that is the first thing I tried to do. I wanted to make a Sumerian tarot. And I started thinking, okay, so maybe this god could be this god, and this god could be this god, and or this god could be this card, and this god could be this card. And it didn't line up. And then finally I got to the Fool, and I'm like, you know, I know exactly who the Fool is. That's me. I'm going to do something different. All right, now, here's why it's actually pretty easy to pick this up. Every card, in this case, we've got the goddess Nanshi, has their associations on the back. I'm not sure you can read that, but there's the associations, and then on the bottom side of the card, it's absolute. On my screen, that looks just like what up there goes. There we go. And there are 84 cards in the deck. The majority of these are deity cards, and the remainder are concepts, like in this case, heaven. Now, what makes a Sumerian Oracle deck reading a little different from a tarot card reading is the orator card. So every reading has one card, the first card you draw, and it's the orator card. And that tells you the perspective that the reading is going to come from. So instead of just asking the spirits just in general to give you some of their wisdom, you're asking whatever spirit decides to show up. Sometimes it's going to be a Sumerian deity, and sometimes it's not. Whatever deity happens to show up, whatever spirit happens to show up, ghost, who knows, that's the perspective that the reading is coming from. And I have had, I've had ghosts, I've had gods from other pantheons, I've had all sorts of spirits. And having that perspective and knowing what perspective they're coming from really makes the reading a lot easier to understand. So let's start out with a past, present, future reading. And that would be, for most readings, a 3-card reading, but for this, it's a 4-card reading. Oh, actually, before we do that, you can use any layout that you're familiar with, just so long as you add in the orator card. So if you're familiar with the Celtic cross from tarot, go ahead and use that, because all of the positions of the layout will be familiar with you, familiar for you. All right, so, oh, and I get asked this a lot. So if you've got the readings on the back of the card and you're shuffling, how do you make sure that you're not influencing your reading? Well, when you shuffle, you cut the deck. Just cut the deck last. All right, so I'm going to do a past, present, future reading. That's the orator. Past, present, future. Now, the god Asarluhi is a god of magic and exorcism. And you see the card is right side up. So here we see, let me adjust the cards a little bit so you can see them a little bit better. Here we see he's right side up. So when the orator card is right side up, we take the reading as coming from him specifically. If the card was upside down, we would say it's somebody similar to him that is not him specifically. So a god of magic and exorcism from another pantheon might be, I suppose Hecate is similar in that has magic associations. Oh, it doesn't have to be a god. It could be an exorcist, somebody who deals with spirits. All right, so Asarluhi is a reflection of his parent, in this case, Enki. He is following in that god's footsteps, and he exorcises ill, he prevents sickness, and he is there to call to for help. Now, let's look at the past. So we've got someone that talks about the health perspective and dealing with spirits perspective. So with the past, we have Ki, and she is an earth goddess. And so the past has life, gardening, the earth, and birth. The present, I didn't tell you about him. The present is Enkidu. Now, if you remember from maybe your school studying Gilgamesh, Enkidu was Gilgamesh's constant companion. In the Babylonian version, they were, well, in one Babylonian version, they were a couple. And in the earliest Sumerian version, Enkidu was the chief and most trusted servant in Gilgamesh's court. And we have it inverted, so I'll be reading the inverted characteristics. And that is hard wisdom, trauma, distress, the substitute king, the scapegoat, or thrown under the bus. So starting from the past, we've got life, gardening, we've got a very vibrant beginning. Now we've got some difficulty in the present. And this difficulty is not necessarily of the person's making. Maybe they're the one that other people blame. And so where's this leading us? Well, that leads us into the future. Oh, I almost forgot. I almost did it again. So the goddess Namu Apsu, she is the primordial mother goddess. She's the goddess of the deep, and that is where all wisdom comes from. And in this position, it is the womb, motherhood, or the mysterious. Now let's take this all together. So we have the god of exorcistic medicine, and we've got life, gardening, the earth and birth. We've got distress in the present, and then in the future we have the womb, motherhood, and the mysterious. So I would say that this reading is all about childhood, all about birth and maybe giving birth in the present or the near present, and then being a mother in the future. Anyway, that's a very quick past, present, future reading. Now, one of my favorite readings that one of the people that uses my deck has actually, before I do that, any questions about that particular reading? Nope. Okay. This is a storyteller reading. Now, this layout is one of my favorites because it was developed by somebody that had gotten the deck, and they were trying different layouts, and they came up with this kind of a sunburst pattern with the orator card in the center, and it ends up telling a story with sort of a moral. And you never really know what the story is until you've done the entire reading. All right. So you read it, oh, and you can't see half of that. It's 9 cards. Let's tuck them up like this. All right, so it's 9 cards. The orator card is in the center. You start at, well, basically 12 o'clock, and you move around in a circle. And each of these on the diagonal transitions you from the beginning to the early middle, to the middle, to late in the story, and then you come full circle back to the beginning. You don't read inversions with the transition cards. Okay, so in this reading, we have the god Zababa, and it's kind of appropriate for Ishtar Fest. Now, it's inverted, so we have a figure with the characteristics of Zababa. And let's say you don't know what the characteristics of Zababa are. Well, then you can just read the card. But okay, so because I said it's kind of appropriate for Ishtar Fest, I'll bet you guys wondering, well, how does that deity have anything to do with Ishtar Fest? So the goddess Inanna was worshipped differently all throughout Mesopotamia. And many of you have probably heard of her and her husband Dumuzi. Well, a lot of the major deities, Inanna included, had multiple husbands or multiple wives. And the goddess Inanna had a different husband in the city of Kish. Kish was a major city back in Mesopotamian, the early times in Mesopotamia. It was a rival to Uruk, which was the city where the stories of Gilgamesh and the descent of Inanna kind of originate. Now, the god there that you see with the little bird down right there, and he's got wings and a sword. He is a war god. But in this case, our reading is not coming directly from him. It's coming from a figure that has similar connotations. And here we see an alternative, a change in perspective, a different point of view, heroics, champion, a cultural idol, or a personal hero. And that's reading the inverted and the right side up. So I would say this story is coming from the perspective of maybe a ghost who was a hero or a supporting hero in life. He was very heroic, very adventurous. And what does the story have? What is the story about? Well, we see this bull figure that is Gugalana. Now, if you guys are familiar with the myth of Gilgamesh, he is the bull of heaven that was slain by Gilgamesh and Enkidu. And so our story starts with strength, vitality, power, and self-assuredness. And I can already see pride coming before the fall. That's a very good beginning to a story. Now, you start at a place of strength, and then what happens? Well, we have a seasonal card. Now, Amesh is the character of the season of summer. And so during the summer and the winter, you had different types of harvest. Now, a lot of people would think, oh, well, you would have the best harvest in the summer, and you would have your weakest harvest, if at all, in the winter. That's kind of a European perspective. But because Mesopotamia is so close to the equator, you've got a lot of hot, dry summers and cool, not cold, but cool, wet winters. And so during the winter is when your bountiful harvest happens. And so here we've got a difficult harvest, maybe some elements of envy because the harvest could have been better. And that brings us from our point of strength to Nisaba, or to a place of, in this position, disapproval or displeasure. So we've got a difficult harvest that brings our hero into a problem situation. And what does our hero do in our problem situation? Well, here we see Pazuzu. Now, if you're familiar with the Exorcist movies, that's not necessarily the greatest example of what Pazuzu is like. Pazuzu is a scary looking monster that keeps the goddess Lamashtu, who is the actual danger, at bay. And so here we have a feared protector, the unrecognized hero. So again, we have a hero element in our story. And this brings us from our place of displeasure in the story, and it brings us to the Eagle Jinn. Now, here we have hidden secret, something not seen, or something undetectable. And I could see that if you've got a heroic figure that's fallen upon hard times, that they might want to continue to be protective, but not do it quite as much in the open. Now, the sun god Bunene, or the sun god Utu, had a chariot driver, Bunene. And that's going to bring us 3/4 of the way along our story. So here we've got a navigator, one who directs, someone who is motivational, someone who brings movement. So in a storyteller perspective, I would say it would motivate our hero to do something, to take action. But what sort of action? Well, now we have Gilgamesh inverted. And I don't think I have to introduce Gilgamesh. He's a little too famous. But after they're motivated, they're exalted, well-liked veteran. Now my eyes lock on that veteran aspect. So in this story, our hero has gained experience, and through experience, they've gained motivation and become well-liked, and they are now being praised for their heroics. And finally, bringing us full circle back to our position of strength and vitality is the storm god Ishkur. And we've got inner turmoil, but also righteous anger, loss of control, release. So they've come around and they've gotten to the position where they're well liked, but something is still bothering them. And that inner turmoil, I would say the resolution of that inner turmoil is what brings them back to their position of strength. So again, if we look at the whole thing together, we've got our heroic storyteller. So the storyteller is going to tell a story that relates to their point of view, their perspective. And they've got a character that goes from strength to a time when they're disapproved of because they didn't do too well, to helping out in the shadows by being scarier than the things that are actually bad, but then being inspired to be more open as a hero. But this doesn't solve their inner turmoil. And only by going through their inner turmoil do they get back to their position of strength. And I suppose you can see right now why I like this layout so much, this storyteller pattern, because it reveals through the cards a story that comes full circle. And it's honestly, it's often very inspiring. All right, any questions? All right. The next layout I'm going to show you guys is something of a poetic layout. Now, if you've read Sumerian text, a lot of you might notice that there's this kind of 3 or 4 part poem style that it's written in. And it'll sound like they're repeating the same thing in different ways. And the reason for that is basically because of how the Sumerian language is designed. We've got a language where each character can mean a whole lot of different things. So if you are saying something, it's easy to be, or if you're writing something down, it's easy to be misunderstood unless you have context. So what they would do is they'd have the first line be a very general statement. The next line builds off of the first line and says it again, but in a more specific way. The third line builds off of the first 2 lines, and now you've got a clear idea of what's being talked about. And then finally, you've got a 4th line, which changes the way that you look at it. So it's your conclusion. And you can say, a servant goes to the market. The next line could be, your servant goes to the fruit and vegetable market. And then the third line could be, your servant Shulge goes to the fruit and vegetable market in a rook. And then finally, you've got the fourth line. And once there, they purchase a barrel full of, well, okay, a barrel full of pomegranates. The reason why I hesitated on barrel there is just my thoughts go, wait a second, they wouldn't waste wood on a barrel. That's valuable. But okay, so oh, Zuzu's coming back. Let's see what he has to say. Oh, it's going to be about the pandemic, isn't it? Thanks, Pazuzu. I'm sure nobody is sick of that right now. But okay. As a protector, maybe this is good news. I don't know. I'll have to find out. So I think I mentioned Pazuzu earlier. He is scary, but he is scary in a good way. And here again, we've got his fearful protectiveness. We've got his balancing against evil. And what is he going to be telling us about? Well, we've got the spirit from a, this is one of the Gilgamesh myths, and he's generally related to sickness. Now we've got a necessary evil or a useful evil, and something that is needed but not wanted. So maybe this doesn't have to do with the pandemic. I've gotten a lot of readings that one of the very first readings I did when the deck first came out said something about a sickness sweeping across the land. I'm like, oh, great. Is the flu season going to be pretty bad? No, it wasn't the flu. Anyway, so let's figure out what this necessary evil is. And we have the Allah. This is a kind of a evil spirit related to bad water. Now, I say evil, and I don't mean evil in the traditional good or bad, like doing wicked things, evil. A lot of times when you see Sumerian texts that have the word evil in it, it's actually translated to, it's actually probably better translated to harmful. It's in the same way that to a chicken, a fox is evil. So it is that which is causing harm to you. But okay, let's see. So we've got a necessary evil or a useful enemy. And this relates to practical tasks, hard work, or the daily routine. Now, I'll bet you're wondering what that has to do with this water demon. Well, like I said, with the evil, it's not something that is necessarily wicked. It's just something that is uncomfortable. And you can see he's got a water carrying pole. Because this demon doesn't have to be about unclean water. You could just be about the difficulties of carrying water. So we've got a necessary evil and a practical task that has to do with hard work. So in this case, I'm thinking it's something that you don't want to do, but you really have to do, and it's difficult to do. But what could this task actually be? And here we have Urugal. Now, Urugal is the capital city of the underworld. And we have technology, innovation, and a new way of doing things. So something that is something you don't want to do, that is difficult, but is a practical task that deals with technology, innovation, or a new way of doing things. So I would guess, based on this reading, you don't want to do your training, but you're going to have to do your training. And what is the conclusion of doing that training? Well, we have Apsu. Now, the Apsu is the great deep. It is the realm where Namu rules, and she is the goddess of the great deep. And the Apsu is where wisdom comes from. And we've got the unfathomable, something beyond understanding, or vastness. So you've worked hard, you've trained, and you've innovated. But the I would say I would take vastness as the conclusion here. You have entered into something bigger, something that is going to have far-reaching implications into what the future may hold for you. Or you could take it a different way, in that you've done this training, but you still don't know what you're looking at. So what do you do when you've got a reading that you're not quite familiar with? You don't quite understand how to read. In this case, I do a clarifier. And so what you do with the clarifier is you cut the deck again. Then you lay down a single other card. And this should help you understand what's going on a little bit better. Now, you often see dragon imagery in a lot of Mesopotamian art. You see dragon descriptions in a lot of texts. They're not these fearsome fire-breathing winged things, but they're also not, they're not these wise golden serpents like you would see in Asian mythology. These are more the pets of the gods. So here we've got power, might, strength, and influence. And that, if you're familiar with dragons of any kind, is a major aspect of dragons, no matter where they are. It's their strength that defines them. So we've got a difficult learning, and this leads us to the unfathomable, something beyond understanding and vastness. But is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it leads to power, might, strength, and influence. So I would say, in that case, it is a good thing. So maybe my first understanding was correct, that it's going to bring you to a place where the world has just become a lot bigger. You've just learned a lot more about the world. All right, so these are a couple of sample readings. Would anybody like to ask a question and choose a layout?
Okay, I'll bite. I don't know what question to ask though.
You could ask a general question like, what does the future hold for me? Or what is some general advice?
Yeah, that's kind of the route I'm gonna go. You have a question in the chat, the name of that last layout?
Oh, the poem layout. Because it's based on Sumerian poetry.
All right. I really like your story layout. And if there's
that's one of my favorite.
If there's any messages that you can derive from that for me, that would be awesome.
All right. Well, I just shuffled. Let's cut the deck. Oh, her, and sometimes him. So our orator is going to be a very interesting deity here. Oh, and it's going to be an interesting story. And see potential loss. Let's see how the story comes out. All right, so the goddess Ningalin is another goddess that has magical connotations. Oh, and you can't see half the layout again. Let's cluster the cards a little up. All right. So, the mongoose has an almost magical ability to survive poison. And so Ningalin is kind of the goddess of the mongoose, but also related to little pest animals. So in that case, the pest animal would be the venomous snake. So in this image here, the mongoose is not the pest. The mongoose is the solution to the pest. Now, since you guys probably don't know much about Ningalin, as I mentioned, she is the goddess of magic, immunity from harm, cunning, dealing with dangers. That kind of tells an interesting aspect of the story, dealing with dangers. Bravery, hunting, swift action, sure aim, removal of pests, and what did I write there? Removal of irritants. So we've got this goddess that is all about how to deal with a dangerous situation. And if you're looking for advice in a story, I think that's a good piece of advice. All right, now we have right at the top the ferocious Lil. It's a wind spirit. And these are often harmful to mothers and small children. And you can see kind of the owl look, and also there's a moon in the background. Now, our story starts with something worrying, menacing, or ominous. So as a story that would deal with how to deal with something worrying, menacing, or ominous, well, I think that's what we're in for. All right. So now we have Nisaba. Now, last time we saw her inverted. And so that was disapproval. No, actually, she was angled. Well, here we have disapproval as the inverted, but we also have written creativity, research, academia, and scholarship. And this brings us from our worrying situation. So something is worrying, and we've got some aspects of disapproval here, but we've got also some aspects of doing research. And this brings us to Gadim. And it's interesting that we have Lil and Gadim in the same reading, because in the Sumerian idea of the soul, of the ghost, you've got three different parts. You've got the breath of life, you've got the water of life, and you've got the shadow. And these are the three portions that make up a soul. And the Lil and the Gadim, or as sometimes it's translated, the phantom and the shade, can go off independently of each other. So you can have the Lil go off in one direction and be kind of like your passions, take on a life of their own. And then you've got the Gadim as your shadow, and that's sort of like your intellect and maybe your magical ability go off in another direction. All right, so we start out with something worrying, and this brings us to research, but something maybe an aspect of disapproval, something that may not be looked well upon. And you end up with your ancestors, you end up with people from the past. So because of that, I'm going to say the research angle is more of what we're looking at. So you look at what they did in the past for your worrying situation. And that takes you to An. An is the god of the upper heavens, the stars. And this brings you to the divine. You've got, on the one hand, you've got divine destruction, you've got lofty ignorance, but on the other hand, you've got divine creation, holiness, and religion. So you've had issues. You're looking to the past. You're doing research on what came before, and this brings you to divinity. But where does the divinity take you? Well, this brings you to We'ila. If you're familiar with the myths, We'ila is the god who rebelled against the other gods. He is a god of intellect, and he said that the gods who were being overworked had to rebel against the gods of heaven because their work was too much. Well, the leader of heaven ended up actually listening to him, but said, you know, I cannot condone your actions. You brought violence to the gods, and so I will hear your pleas, but you are going to have to pay the price. And so he was sacrificed to give intellect to mankind. And mankind was then set upon the task of maintaining civilization, which is ultimately the work of the gods. And so in our story here, the people from the past, or the ones who came before, lead us through religion into logic, reason, and being technically correct. So often when we are technically correct, we've got all of our facts straight, but we're missing the general point. And here we have Amesh again. So now we've got this difficult time. We've got jealousy, competition. So the season, again, of the summer is hot, dry, and we don't have a bountiful crop. We've taken our logic and reason and had a rough time of it. And this brings us to the inverted eagle chin. So it's bringing us to something secret, something not seen. In this case, I would say it's something that we didn't see before. And that leads us to the underworld. And here we have the conclusion of our story. So Kur is the underworld. It's not heaven, it's not hell, it's just where the dead go. Specifically, the shades that I mentioned. And it's thought to be to the west and in the mountains. But it's also the afterlife, the netherworld. And here we also have the aspect of the spiritual voice. So we've got this story here where you start with a worrying situation and you're still in a worrying situation, or you have found a new worrying situation at the end. But you've gotten there by doing research, looking at those who came before, thinking, I'm saying, combining lofty ignorance here with being technically correct here, you get smug that you've found the solution, but this leads you along a difficult path until you uncover something that is hidden. And that leads you through the graveyard, through the afterlife, and into the worrying situation that you started with. But now that you've come full circle, you've come armed with knowledge from the past. You've come armed with some aspects from religion. You've learned something hidden. And so you can approach the difficult situation with a new light. And that is the story. I'd like to say they lived happily ever after, but I don't think that's how this story ends.
Some of this is insanely accurate. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Any last minute questions? Well, it was wonderful having all you guys here. I hope you guys will show up tomorrow for my other presentation where I talk about the lost city of Arata.
And that's at 2 p.m., right?
Yep, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. If you get a second and you want to drop a link or something to where we can learn more about this Oracle deck, if you want to put that in on the Facebook page, that would be fantastic.
Sure thing. I'll do that right after we're done here.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.